Hi everyone, welcome back to A Level Biology Help. Today I'm going to take you through the biodiversity within a community section for AQA A Level Biology. Also, I'll be going through a few exam style questions and explain their mark schemes. And as always, I'll be putting timestamps in the comments section so that you can skip to the different sections in the video if you do not wish to watch the whole video. Right, so let's get started with the video. So, what do we mean by biodiversity? Well, as the name suggests, biodiversity is the diversity of life. This can relate to a range of habitats from a small local habitat, such as a forest, to a larger habitat such as the Earth. And by a habitat, we mean the range of physical, biological, and environmental factors that a species can live in. Biodiversity can be measured in a number of different ways. One way is species richness. Species richness is a measure of the number of different species in a community. So for example, if 5 different species were present in a community, the species richness will be 5. Also, biodiversity can be measured through what we call an index of diversity. This describes a relationship between the number of species in a community and the number of individuals in each species. This is a more accurate way of measuring biodiversity, as the number of individuals in each species are measured as well as the number of species. This takes into account small population sizes as well as large population sizes. And we calculate index of diversity using this formula. Now don't worry, it's not as complicated as it looks. So if we take my pen, D basically means index of diversity. Capital N here means the total number of organisms of all species. And the lowercase n means the total number of organisms of each species. So how we calculate index of diversity is the total number of organisms of all species, capital N, multiplied by capital N minus 1 divided by the sum of lowercase n multiplied by lowercase n minus 1. So next I'm going to go through an example of this. So here we have the formula in the corner, with capital N being the total number of organisms of all species, and lowercase n being the total number of organisms of each species. So here we have a table consisting of 4 different species, so we can say the species richness is 4. So we have chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas and baboons. And we have their abundance or presence in the community. This is represented by N. So we have 4 chimpanzees, 4 orangutans, 12 gorillas and 8 baboons. So the first step that we need to do is calculate capital N, which is the total number of organisms of all species. To do this, we need to add up all of these values, so 4 plus 19 plus 12 plus 8. And then we get 43 for capital N. So next we need to calculate capital N minus 1, which is this section here. So that would be 42. And then if we calculate capital N times by capital N minus 1, we would get 43 times 42, which is, if I just calculate that right now, 1,806. Right, so next we need to calculate N minus 1, or lowercase n minus 1. This is pretty simple. So we need to just take away 1 from these values. Here we would have 3. Here we would have 18. Here we would have 11. And here we would have 7. So the next step is we need to calculate these two or multiply these two numbers together to get n times n minus 1. So here we would have 4 times 3, which is 12. 19 times 18, which is 342. 12 times 11, which is 132. And 8 times 7, which is 56. And if we add all these numbers together, we'll get the sum of n times n minus 1. And if I just calculate that now, we would get 542. So the sum of n times n minus 1 is 542. So the next step is we need to plug these values into our formula here. So the index of diversity is this value here, 1806 over 542. If we do that sum, we would get a value for the index of diversity as 3.33 rounded to 3 significant figures. So this is our answer. But biodiversity is reduced by farming techniques. So monocultures decrease genetic diversity or biodiversity because the human population is rising rapidly. This increases demand for food, so we need to create more monocultures. A monoculture is basically a field where only one crop is planted to meet demands for food. This obviously decreases species diversity, as there is only one species present in the field. So we have a field of, I'm not quite sure which crop this is actually. Ploughing can also reduce biodiversity, and also crop spraying with pesticides, fungicides and insecticides, as this kills pests and insects, so decreasing species diversity. This creates a conflict between conservation of species and farming to meet demands for agricultural products such as food. One way that we can meet this in the middle is by using uncultivated strips of land alongside hedges, which provides a food source and habitats for organisms such as birds. The uncultivated strips allows the habitat sources and the monocultures to still be grown. Also, farmers can do the delayed harvesting of crops, which allows seed dispersal, so increasing species diversity as more crops are growing. And another controversial point is that meadow conservation, so in species such as wildflowers, which provide habitats for many different organisms, conflicts with grass planting. Grass planting would be beneficial for livestock breeding, for food demands once again. Right, so that is it for the content, and now I'm going to get on to some exam questions. So let's look at this one. Ecologists measured the body lengths, so we can underline body lengths, of male and female thorny lizards living in the same habitat. The ecologists measured the body lengths to the nearest 5 mm. The graph shows how they presented their results. So here on the x-axis we have body length in millimeters, and on the y-axis we have the number of thorny lizards, and the black bars show male lizards and the white bars show female lizards. So let's look at the question. Give two differences in the variation of body length of male and female thorny lizards. So if we look at the graph, we can see that females are generally longer because there are a higher number of female thorny lizards with a higher body length. So females are generally longer, up to 115 mm, which is what the graph goes up to. The second point that I've made is females show a greater variation in the body length, because as you can see there is no value for male lizards above 100 mm, but there is for females in all body lengths. So let's look at the mark scheme. So the first marking point says females are generally longer / larger / bigger up to 115 mm, or you can put males are shorter. So we would get that mark. It says ignore tall, and this doesn't really relate to the specific body length. So if you put this, you don't get the mark. Now here it says except females have a larger / 90 modal / peak / most common value, and males have a smaller / 80 modal / peak / most common value. So you can put that as well. Except mean length of females greater / mean length of males shorter. so you can refer to the mean average if you want. Also, it says here, reject the use of men in relation to 80mm or 90mm, and it says reject most of the females are 90mm long, so most of the males are 80mm long. As this isn't really comparing males and females, as that is what the question is asking. So if you put any of these 2 points here, you don't get any marks at all for the question. Even if you got this second marking point right, you don't get any marks at all for the question. So if we look at the second marking point, it says females show a greater range / variation / males show a narrow range / variation. So you'd get all 2 marks for the question. It also says accept correct use of figures from the graph. So you can use the figures from the graph if you like, but these have to be correct. So if we go on to the next question, this is a calculation of index of diversity. So the first thing that we would need to do is calculate capital N, which would be 156 if we add up 5, 11, 22, 91, 13, 5, 8 and 1. So we would get 156. N minus 1 would therefore be 155, and n times n minus 1 would be 24,180. Next we need to write out what lowercase n minus 1 is. So here I've already inserted that, so 5 minus 1 is 4, 11 minus 1 is 10, and so on and so on. And now I have calculated n times n minus 1 in lowercase. So 5 times 4 is 20, 11 times 10 is 110, 22 times 21 is 462, and so on and so on. Now I apologise for this not lining up. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to add up all these values here. And if we do that, we would get 9,014. So the final thing that we need to do is to plug these 2 values into our formula. So we need to do 24,180 divided by 9,014. And if we do that, we will get a value for the index of diversity as 2.68, which is our value rounded to 3 significant figures. So here is the mark scheme. So the mark scheme says you can have it in a range of 2.6 to 2.7. Our answer was 2.68, so we would get both marks. However, it says incorrect answer, so you can get the answer wrong, but the evidence of the numerator of 24,180 or 156 times 155 or denominator of 9,014 1 mark. So if you get the answer wrong, but you get either the numerator or the denominator of the equation right, you can get 1 mark. We would get both marks as we got the answer right. Right, so this is the last part of this particular question. The ecologists also determined the index of diversity of lizards in an oil palm plantation next to the woodland area. They found fewer species of plants in the oil palm plantation. Lizards feed on plants and insects. Explain why fewer species of plants will lead to fewer species of lizard in the oil palm plantation. So we need to link this, so the plant to the lizards. So as we can see, lizards feed on plants and insects. So first we can realise that this would decrease food sources. But this is what I've written. So fewer plant species mean that there are less habitats. This means that there is a lower diversity of insects because the insects live in the plants. So this means that there are fewer food sources for the lizards. When a question asks you about the effect of fewer species of something linked to something else, you need to write about habitats, diversity, and food sources. So if you look at the mark scheme, you don't get any marks for the fewer plant species point. So mark point 1 says, so fewer habitats / niches, ignore habitat size, or neutral, fewer homes. So the examiner doesn't like it if you write these terms. So the second marking point says, so lower diversity of insects, so fewer insect species or fewer insect types. Notice it has underlined the term insect, so you need to refer to insects in your answer to get the mark. So neutral, fewer insects, or they also accept less variety of insects, but they prefer it if you refer to diversity. So the third marking point says, so fewer food sources or less variety of food. You need to use a plural source here to get the mark, as the S is underlined. So neutral, less food, or ignore references to pesticides, farmers' actions, competition between lizards, and evolution, as the question is asking you to refer to the plant species. Right, so let's go on to the next question. So part A, what two measurements are needed to calculate an index of diversity? As we said earlier, this is a pretty easy question. So the number of individuals of each species and the total number of individuals of all species. To look at the mark scheme, number of individuals of each species, it sets population for number, so you can write the population of each species. And the second marking point is the total number of individuals / number of species, which we wrote also. And it also accepts species richness. So let's look at this next question. A herbicide is a chemical used to kill weeds. Ecologists investigated the effect of a herbicide on crop yield and the diversity of insects. They sprayed different fields with the same volume of different concentrations of the herbicide. At harvest, the ecologists determined the mean crop yield and the mean index of diversity of insects for fields that had received the same concentration of the herbicide. The figure below shows their results. So the x-axis tells you the concentration of herbicide sprayed in the field in milligrams per decimeter cubed. The straight line here tells you the mean crop yield, and the dotted line says the mean index of diversity of insects. So let's look at the question. Some fields acted as controls. They were sprayed with a solution that did not contain the herbicide. Explain the purpose of these control fields. So the main purpose of a control is to prove that it is the independent variable that is causing the change. In this case, it is the herbicide. So we can write to show that the results are due to the herbicide and not to any other factors. So if we look at the mark scheme, you can write it shows the results are due to the herbicide, which we wrote. Or you can write they're not due to another factor, or to compare the effect of using and not using the herbicide, or shows the effect of adding the herbicide. So it says neutral allows a comparison or ensures results are due to the independent variable, but it rejects insecticide, as we are not referring to insecticides in this question at all, we are referring to herbicides, but they accept pesticide. Right, this is the last question, I think. Yeah, it is. So, suggest an explanation for the relationship between the concentration of herbicide and the mean crop yield. So as this is a suggest question, it requires your own ideas inferred from the data. Right, so the first thing that we need to do is to look at the relationship between the concentration of herbicide and the mean crop yield. The mean crop yield is this undotted line, so this one here. As you can see, the mean crop yield increases as the concentration of herbicide increases up to 400 milligrams per decimeter cubed. However, after 400, the mean crop yield decreases. So this is what I've written. As herbicide concentration increases, more weeds are killed, so more crops survive. This is inferred by the fact that the mean crop yield is increased, so suggesting that weeds are killed, because the crops are no longer in competition with the weeds, so they survive more. However, very high herbicide concentrations, so I put in brackets above 100, are harmful to crops. This is shown by the fact that the mean crop yield decreases after this point. So let's look at the mark scheme. So the first marking point says more weeds are killed, so more crops / plants survive / higher yield / less competition. That's what we wrote. And the second marking point says high concentrations of herbicide harm / damage / kill / are toxic to crops or plants. So we would get both marks for this question. Now it says here it's a pesticide, neutral insecticide, so they don't really like it if you write insecticide, and it accepts the use of figures, for example 400 plus. So you can use the actual figures from the graph in your answer if you like, but it's not essential, as the question does not say use the data from the graph. If it said that, you would need to use the figures. Right, that is all I want to say for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Please comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.